And when you're ready, Jay.
All right, thank you. I'll start out by saying that my training, of course, is as a philosopher. I'm not a textual scholar. I do have some knowledge of textual issues, but I do know Scripture pretty well, and I know the history of the church, and I know philosophy decently. So my argumentation will focus mainly on how, as a system, we interpret and understand the Scriptures, how they confirm Christ, and then how history and logic do as well. So I'll begin with a quote. Our governing presupposition is stated well, I think, in letter 82 of St. Augustine to Jerome, where he says that if there's anything in the biblical text as he possessed them that appeared to be corrupted or appeared to have translator errors or copyist errors, he was willing to admit that there were copyist errors or that he failed to understand them. So we have a governing presupposition of belief that's going to determine our interpretive matrix or framework. So I'm going to start my analysis by looking at the Old Testament itself. For us, the strongest argument we would say, beginning with Genesis, is the relationship of each one of the covenants as they're revealed in Genesis. So in Genesis, we have the notion of the covenant made with Adam, as the minor prophets say. We have the covenant that is broken, that's then made with Noah. We have a covenant made with Abraham. We have a covenant made with Moses. And there's many places actually in the Torah that explicate that the covenant made with Moses is in perfect continuity with the covenant made with Abraham. And so from the Mosaic covenant, the next one in that line is the Davidic covenant. And so we see all of these as one covenant, and they come to a consummation in the person of Christ, the second person of the Godhead, for our view, incarnate by the Virgin Mary, right? So in that regard, when we look back at redemptive history, we see a logical process and a logical flow through each one of these covenants that in no way entails some kind of vast contradiction. So granted, there are situations where aspects of the Mosaic ceremonies that were given to the Jews, for us, they actually typified the Melchizedekian priesthood, the priesthood that is from all eternity. Hebrews, if you believe Paul wrote Hebrews, describes the eternal priesthood that we have in Christ. And so actually the Levitical priesthood that's later given is based on the priesthood of Melchizedek. And that is because Melchizedek typified himself, the person of Christ. So when we look at the Old Testament, not only do we see this unfolding revelation of God bringing humanity back to himself after the fall in the garden, we see a logical process to the theology and the revelation that occurs. It's not all at once. God doesn't tell everything to Abraham. He doesn't tell everything to Joseph. He doesn't tell everything to Moses. There's a progressive revelation. And we would say that based on what Deuteronomy says, especially 13, you cannot have later revelation that comes into conflict with what is given in prior revelation. So everything that must come later must conform to the prior. So when we look at the major and minor prophets, when they make many times distinctions about the one like the Son of Man riding the chariot, who is identified as divinity, we can't, or in Daniel 7, for example, we can't say, well, those are corruptions, those are out of accord with what was given in Torah. Because they are, as the Quran itself says, those were the prophets. I'm going to get into it later when Dr. Shabir replies, he will mention many things that he thinks are corrupt or inconsistencies. But let's focus still on the Old Testament while we're here, and note that for us, the Messianic prophecies don't just start with or lay out something that's related to covenants. It actually goes a lot further than that, right? It actually goes into these many theophanies. So if we start with the theophanies in Genesis 1, we have God walking in the garden. We have God coming to Abraham, and Abraham in Genesis 12 when he's called. It is identified as God himself who speaks to Abraham face to face. When we look at 15:1, 4, 17, and then into 16 with Hagar herself, Hagar says, I saw God face to face. 18:1 and 19:1, we get the same language and imagery. 24:48, 28, Genesis 31:11 and 32:30, right? The wrestling with an angel, I wrestled with God himself face to face. Genesis 35:1, Genesis 48:15, 16, where we are told that the angel of the Lord, the same angel, this mysterious figure who was sent by Yahweh, who wrestled with, right, Jacob, he redeemed me. Angels don't redeem, right? So when we come to Exodus, we find similar language and imagery. Exodus 3, 4 through 6, Exodus 3, 15, Exodus 15, 5 through 8, Exodus 23, 22, 20 to 23, Exodus 33, 1 through 3. What we find there is the angel of the Lord has the name of Yahweh placed in him. Now, God doesn't give his name to another, as we're told oftentimes, right? The Muslims like to cite Isaiah, I do not give my glory to another, my name. But here, God is putting his name in his angel. Now, angel just means messenger. It could be a human, it could be an angelic being, which are created, or it can be a divine hypostasis for us, a divine person. So we would say that if we look at the revelation of the Old Testament as a whole, just from these theophanies, and by the way, this continues into Numbers, 1, 9, 22, even to Balaam, Joshua 5, Judges 13, right? Manoah says, I have seen God face to face. Moses walks up on the mountain, sees God face to face. How is this possible if no man can see God and live? Well, because there is a way for God to see, for man to see God and to live, and that's because all of these actions, as well as all these covenants, anticipate the incarnation of the Logos, the incarnation of Christ himself. If we look at messianic prophecies, we will see a similar pattern. Genesis 3:15, the seed of the woman will crush the head of the serpent. This is ironic because we know, of course, that this is fulfilled in our view in Mary and the son of Mary, who crushed the head of the serpent, Satan, at the cross. Right? The death of Christ was predicted all through the Old Testament. Many of the Psalms predict the struggling and death of the Messiah that he willfully went under. Right? This wasn't taken from him as if God didn't willfully allow this. Right? He did all that willfully, we say. We look at Genesis 12, 15, 17, 22 with the calling of Abraham. What do we see there? We see a prophecy that when the Messiah comes, the Gentile nations will convert. They will be brought into this one covenant that I mentioned early on, the covenant from Adam all the way up. They will begin to convert and worship the God of Israel. That's happened for 2,000 years. That happened for hundreds and hundreds of years before the advent of Islam. So all of these messianic prophecies, which, by the way, the Quran will admit, as we will see, I have within the first 10 surahs, countless examples of the Quran affirming these Old Testament texts and the stories and these events, sometimes passing over and sometimes in very large chunks, which, as we will see, I think is one of the chief problems for the Islamic view, because we will have so many things that will be mentioned in the Torah that are nowhere in Islam. And to my knowledge, maybe Dr. Shabir can enlighten us on this. To my knowledge, I don't know where or how those are explained. We will see when he replies, of course. But some more of these prophecies will note the life of certain figures like Joseph, the prediction in Genesis 49, 10 and 11 of the Messiah will come, Shiloh will come, the nations will turn to the God of Israel. When the Messiah comes, when Shiloh comes, due to one of the signs it says will be the removal of the royal house of David. Right? No more house of David, no more priesthood, no more nation of Israel. Well, interesting that, of course, in Luke 21 and Matthew 24, Jesus predicts this very thing. He predicts that the destruction of the temple, the destruction and removal would come upon the nation of Israel as a covenantal curse, mentioned at the end of Leviticus and at the end of Deuteronomy, the covenant curses coming upon Israel due to their rejection of the Messiah. So all of that is predicted not just in Jesus, but actually going back to Genesis 49, 10 and 11. We see in the Psalms, Psalm 2, 22, 72, 110, admittedly messianic psalms that, of course, refer to when the Messiah comes, as Luke says in Luke 1 and 2, he will be given the throne of his father David, right? We believe that occurred in the ascension. The throne of his father David was not something on earth. It's in heaven. He is the right hand of God. As the Song of Moses says, the Song of Moses says that the angel of the Lord, the right hand of God, right? Same idea, same imagery. Same person, present, we would say, in Ezekiel 1 and Ezekiel 10. I think I have that on here somewhere, but anyway. Ezekiel 1, here it is. Ezekiel 1, Ezekiel 10, we have the reference to the one like a son of man who rides the chariot, right? The chariot, the glory cloud is seen there. The Shekinah is seen there in Ezekiel's vision. The same one like a son of man, present in Daniel 7, distinct from the Ancient of Days, right? Who is that? It's the eternal Son of God. Now, there's many other texts I could give you, many other theophanies, Zechariah 1, 2, 3. Many texts that show the same idea, even in the Old Covenant, of not just a strict monotheism, but also Father, Son, and Spirit, we would say. So this is not a doctrine that developed wholesale out of Paul. It's not something that early church fathers invented. It's something that grew out of the tradition of the Old Testament. So what really is at debate here in our debate is which religion, which system has the best explanation, in my view, of the continuity between the Old and the New Testament. In my view, Orthodox Christianity, not Roman Catholicism, I'm not here to defend Protestantism, Orthodox Christianity is in full continuity precisely because all of these things that are mentioned in the law and the covenant of the Old Testament, the book of the covenant that the Quran says was given to Moses, these are all in Orthodox Christianity. We have a priesthood. We have an altar. We have Pentecost. We have the celebration of these things in their fulfillment, and they are nowhere. Right now, they're said to be eternal. Remember, when Moses goes up on the mountain, he sees the tupos, he sees the types of the things in heaven. He institutes this liturgical worship on earth. Hence, the tabernacle, which becomes the temple, is filled with all of this imagery. It's filled with it has the altar. It has all of these things, the sacrifices, right? Which, as we said, are typological of the Melchizedekian priesthood, according to Hebrews, which Jesus brought into reality. Hence why at the end of Hebrews, Paul says, we have an altar from which those who serve at the Jewish tabernacle no longer have a right to eat at, because we have the real altar, what was in heaven. Christ brought that reality of the liturgical worship of heaven that John sees in the Apocalypse, chapters 4 and 5, down to earth, and now it's a reality. That's the whole point. That was the whole point of Christ's coming, was to institute the worship of heaven on earth, which again includes all these ideas that are lost or apparently forgotten or arbitrarily ad hoc abrogated. We'll have to wait and see, or maybe they're all corruptions. I'm interested to see if all of these aspects of the temple worship are somehow abrogated or corruptions, given the fact that they play such a central role to the unity of the Torah. So in that regard, I would say that there are many, many New Testament texts. How much more time do I have? I can't really see that number.
3-minute warning.
Okay. 3 minutes?
Yes.
So I would say when we come to the New Testament text, we will find a strong continuity, not just with Jesus, right? In Matthew 5, when he says, not one jot or tittle will pass away until until heaven and earth, right, pass away. Not one jot or tittle will pass away from the law. This is consistent in Jesus as well as in Paul. So when we talk about the passing away of the temple or this kind of stuff, again, we believe that all of those things entered into Orthodox Christianity. Now, again, you can say, well, no, you don't have animal sacrifices. Yes, but the purpose of the animal sacrifices themselves was to point to the sacrifice of Christ, right? So we do possess, a priesthood and a sacrifice and an offering and an altar, as Paul says at the end of Hebrews, which the rest of the world, the rest of the religions do not have. Judaism no longer has this altar. They no longer have a priesthood. We still have the priesthood. Now remember, in the law, we're said that these promises are eternal. They can't go away. They don't vanish. They can't just, if the Quran is based on the eternal Quran, then the promises that are made, right, can't just be abrogated. It would be ad hoc. It would be a double standard. So watch for that. But the New Testament text, we can look at Matthew 1, 23, 3, where John the Baptist prepares the way for Yahweh, citing Malachi. We can look at Jesus being worshipped in Matthew 8, 3, 14, 33, Matthew 12, 8. He is the Lord of the Sabbath, the Lord of the Sabbath, In 9, 2, 3, 4, he forgives sins. In Matthew 10, 33, he is equating himself with God, hence why the Pharisees, of course, consistently get mad at him. And we will find that actually, if you look at Mark, most of those texts in various ways are also repeated in Mark's account. So lastly, in my last minute, I would sum up by saying that one last minute. So I will sum up by saying that my logical argument is also in accord with all this theology as well, that when we as Orthodox understand the Logos not as something impersonal or generic, but rather as the second person of the Godhead, this actually gives us a basis for how we understand the rational principles behind all things that are made. So even in Islam, you have the doctrine of Tanzih, and again, if I misstate any of this, he can correct me, Tanzih. In this idea, you have the notion based on, I think, Surah 42, if I'm going from memory here, the idea that there's nothing created like Allah. If there's nothing created like Allah, then how can the words of the Quran explain or match up to or have any kind of analogia or truth propositions, all of which are created propositions in our mind, sentences are created. How do these words actually tell us anything about something radically transcendent? That itself presupposes the incarnational principle, which is our religion.
Time.